Hi everyone, welcome back. If you don't know me, my name is Catherine, and if you do know me, you'll know that this is very much usual. We jump from topic to topic here, depending on, quite frankly, how the wind blows. So I'm so grateful that you can make it here or make it back. Today, apparently, we are talking about jealousy.
Something that I've been wanting to talk about on here is jealousy within friendships, but not as in, oh, my friend is jealous of me, but from the perspective of being the friend who is jealous. I had a friend that I used to be friends with. We're not friends anymore, and you know what? For good reason, because genuinely, I don't think I could continue being their friend because of the fact that I honestly was just jealous of them.
Or more accurately, we are speaking more candidly about, experiencing it. In other cases, experiencing it against others.
That girl coming out saying that she was jealous of her friend and shit, it just confirms exactly what I've been telling y'all for the past few months. Because, y'all really tried to gaslight me when I said that I'm scared to make friends due to jealousy. And a lot of the friendships that I had, the person was jealous of me and shit. Y'all really tried to gaslight me. But I'm telling you, I don't think y'all understand how common it is for somebody to be jealous of you and still be close to you. I'm telling you, bro, your biggest haters are not the ones who are loud about it. It's the ones who are in your face, acting like they like you, acting like they support you. Whole time, they secretly fucking hate you because they cannot be you, bro. I'm telling you, yo, y'all really try to gaslight me, but the shit is common as hell. That's why it's scary out here, bro. And then on top of it, when I looked in the comments, a lot of y'all kept saying shit oh, well, jealousy is a normal emotion. Oh, well, we all get jealous. And when I made that video where I said, I don't think jealousy is a normal emotion, y'all said the same exact thing, bro. And I'm telling you right now, that shit is not normal. I'm still standing on what I said. That shit is not normal. You guys are trying to normalize that because you're trying to cope with the fact that you are a jealous bitch. Whole time, that shit is not fucking normal, bro. I'm telling you, you're possessed. That's a demon. That's not normal. You need to cleanse your spirits. I keep telling y'all, bro, jealousy can kill. Jealousy can make somebody want to take you off the face of this earth. That's not fucking normal. That's no, yo, y'all not gaslighting me no more. Cause bitch, cheap. I'm tired.
There has undoubtedly been truly a surprising amount of conversation in which people are, by some interpretations, bravely, admitting their jealousy towards friends, towards people in their immediate circle, and it's sending, it's sending ripples through the tide. People have a lot to say, and so do I. So even though I don't ordinarily pull on trends, I did want to talk about it. Not because I find myself in agreement with any particular side of the conversation. In fact, the opposite may actually be closer to the truth. I don't think I agree with anyone's framing of the conversation wholly. Some critics of the discussion have argued that, such conversations risk normalizing jealousy, as if merely having the discussion, merely having the conversation somehow legitimizes it, as if bringing discourse to its existence makes it more tolerable. And I'm sure you can tell I don't agree with that either. And I don't think the issue is primarily about normalizing jealousy. I don't think that is what is actually happening. What we are collectively witnessing here is actually, and again, just my opinion, I think something far more uncomfortable. An unflattering overexposure to a social condition that is already deeply pervasive. In other words, this conversation has not, created jealousy. It has not been wholly generative of the bitterness. It's simply made its presence much more conspicuous. And that overexposure, right, that visibility, it tends to make people incredibly uneasy, especially when the emotion, so undisguised, is one that most people prefer to believe that they are above. And so here's the thing, and here's what I actually think about this. I do not believe it is psychologically plausible that any human being has never experienced jealousy in its most primitive form. Such a claim, in my personal opinion, would require someone to have lived entirely outside the structural conditions that organize society itself, which, to put it mildly, is unlikely. When one understands the urgency of competitive systems within human networks, it becomes very clear, it becomes very obvious that comparison is not a moral anomaly. It is actually one of the primary engines of human advancement. When you look at things like ambition, like aspiration, status mobility, goal setting, you will notice that these things are frequently catalyzed through comparative perception. No human being stands alone. We know that we don't just we don't just operate in psychological vacuums. We occupy relational hierarchies. And economics, stripped to its conceptual core, is simply the study of scarcity. Once scarcity exists within a system, and it could be biological, it could be social, it could really be on any dimension, competition necessarily follows. When something is limited, human beings must then position themselves relative to others in order to secure access to whatever it is that is scarce. And so from that moment forward, hierarchies emerge. And those hierarchies undoubtedly obey a logic that most economists would immediately recognize. There are, quite literally, economics to human social behavior. And economics, as we know, as we've actually been discussing in previous videos, is just the study, rather the management and distribution of limited resources across competing demands. Which immediately begs the urgent and necessary question, what exactly then is in scarce supply? Examining material resources, the usual candidates are very, very obvious. We've got money, we've got food, we've got water, we've got land. But you guys, when we pivot to the immaterial currencies of human life, we find that the same logic persists with, I think, truly a surprising force. Things like love, things like beauty, things like attention, things like power, things like recognition. At first glance, the scarcity of these immaterial goods seems, intuitive. These seem inherently limited. Yet I think even the scarcity of material resources is truly less natural than it actually appears. I mean, I look at wealth. The global wealth distribution is extremely skewed towards the top. The top 10%, for example, of adults control about, I think the number is 76% of the global wealth. The top 1% alone owns about roughly 44 to 46% of all wealth on Earth. By contrast, the bottom 50% of humanity owns about 1 to 2% of global wealth. And so when you look at this in absolute numbers, the top 1% collectively holds over $120 trillion in wealth. The bottom half of the world shares about $4 to $5 trillion combined. And so that means about 4 billion people share less wealth than the tiny global elite. As I said earlier, the same structural pattern emerges with things like food production, land ownership, housing markets, and even technological access. And so we see that scarcity in many cases is not an unavoidable condition of human nature. It is actually a managed condition of distribution. Markets frequently operate by engineering perceptions of limitation. A product essentially becomes valuable not necessarily because it's useful, but because it's inaccessible, because it's quote unquote rare. See, limitation increases desirability, right? Exclusivity increases the price. Artificial scarcity becomes economically profitable. And so if this mechanism governs the distribution, like the management of material goods, I don't think it's unreasonable to assume that it naturally extends into the psychological economy of human life. Again, we're talking love, beauty, attention, power, recognition. All of these qualities, we all know, you guys, that they are distributed through channels of perceived limitation. Historically, such instances of comparison, right, such dynamics of necessary competition, I think they occurred within relatively small spaces. I'm talking, between siblings, between neighbors, local rivals are competing merchants, aristocratic houses, political factions. But modern technological systems have, I think, scaled comparison to planetary proportions. Today, an individual in their ordinary apartment can measure their life against the curated existence of celebrities, of oligarchs, of these algorithmically amplified strangers. And so the result is a person perpetually being in a state of comparative exposure. And comparative exposure is the soil in which envy germinates. The architecture of social media has effectively globalized comparison networks, which raises, another truly unsettling question. Are human beings neurologically designed to witness the lives of millions of competitors? Are we designed to perpetually deal with this kind of aggressive simultaneous exposure? You guys, I think that we are very quick to condemn jealousy as this incurable moral defect. Yet at the same time, entire economic systems celebrate envy-driven competition, or rather envy-driven dynamics as a critical driver of things like innovation, of productivity, of free market success. This is literally, these are the bones of capitalism. On one side of the culture, the evil eye is framed as this, as this corrosive, this destructive spiritual force. But on the other end of things, entire industries monetize off the backs of people's insecurity. The paradox is difficult to ignore. I mean, across almost basically every religious and philosophical tradition, we are warned about the corrosive nature of envy. I mean, the idea of the image of the evil eye appears across Mediterranean, across African traditions, across certain South Asian traditions, across Middle Eastern traditions. I mean, that list is not even exhaustive, but I think the reason is because human beings have long observed that the mere perception of scarcity creates a very distinct psychological condition. It engenders a state that isn't passive, that isn't innocuous to the person it possesses, and that can reasonably be transacted against in an economic sense. Here's the other thing. Through an envious framework, I truly do believe that we as human beings become like embarrassingly compromised, and I mean severely compromised in determining what is actually good for us. One of the most widely cited demonstrations of relative utility comes from experiments discussed by economists Frank A. Robert H. Frank and Amos Tversky. Participants were essentially asked to choose between two hypothetical worlds. Okay, you've got world A and you've got world B. In world A, you earn 50,000. Okay, you're not doing terribly, at least you're getting by, but everybody else around you earns only 25,000. In world B, however, things are different. You are doing much better. Somehow, some way, you managed to break through the ceiling. Okay, you are earning $100,000, but everybody else is earning $200,000. Now, despite the fact that world B obviously doubles the participants' absolute income, a substantial proportion of respondents actually preferred world A simply because the relative position was better. In variations of the experiment, 50 to 60% of participants chose the lower absolute income scenario if it preserves higher status. You guys, the implication is profound. People clearly prefer less wealth if it means greater relative superiority. I mean, it's even without a study, even without an experiment, we know that people don't evaluate value in absolute terms. We evaluate it comparatively, which conveniently leads directly to my thesis. Well, one of several theses I'm introducing throughout this video. Scarcity often begins as a material condition, right? But envy is different. Envy is worse because it begins as a perceptual condition. Once individuals internalize the belief that the structure of reality itself is unjust, that others possess advantages that illegitimately diminish their own position, resentment acquires an extraordinary moral force. And under such conditions, the boundaries of restraint begin to erode. History offers countless examples of what can follow: theft, murder, betrayal, sabotage, violence. Not because human beings are inherently malevolent, but because when people begin to see the world itself as fundamentally unfairly arranged, they begin to see actions like transgression, things like betrayal, things like, we can think about every extreme action under the sun to compensate for what one is lacking. They begin to see these egregious actions not as overtly transgressive, not as overtly wrong, but as necessarily corrective, right? As necessarily compensating for an already unfair structure. Now, when we look at chronic envy, and particularly I'm talking about the ruminative form that is triggered by persistent social comparison, we know that it actually activates the body's stress response circuitry. Studies in endocrinology show that prolonged emotional rumination elevate a hormone called cortisol. This is the primary stress hormone associated with the sympathetic nervous system. Elevated cortisol over long periods of time suppress osteoblast activity. This is the cellular process responsible for bone formation, whilst obviously accelerating bone reabsorption. And so the result, naturally, is the gradual degradation of bone density. So why am I telling you this? Well, basically, sustained psychological stress, particularly generated by status anxiety and comparative resentment, can literally weaken the structural architecture of your body. The ancient metaphor of rotting the bones now, I think, appears eerily prescient. Yet, again, the biological consequences are only half of the story. To reiterate what I said earlier, once a person becomes chronically persuaded that reality in and of itself is just conspired against their well-being, that others possess advantages that diminish their relative standing, diminish their potential to thrive, envy can crystallize into something far more potent, far more destructive than simply a passing emotion. It becomes an internalized moral narrative about injustice. And once that narrative is fully absorbed, it can justify, like I said, almost anything, almost any inexcusable action. It is therefore not incidental that the first recorded homicide in the Bible was precipitated not by territorial anxiety, but by relative comparison, by Cain looking at his brother and seeing, okay, no, there is definitely some favoritism going on here. The world is not fair. God himself is not fair. Which brings us again to another crucial clarification. Sorry guys, I'm just finding my thought. Envy is often treated as a normal, as a passive private sin of the observer. It is not. It is not an isolated emotional state for the simple reason that it is economically traded against. Which is why I find it deeply disingenuous when someone claims that they have never experienced envy, both in, feeling towards others and, exactly against you. I have to reasonably ask, like, have you never participated in the free market? Have you never been around people, honestly? Have you never wanted to improve your position after exposure to someone higher in the social hierarchy? Comparison in isolation, that is, it's not an aberration of moral weakness. It is the operating logic of competitive systems. And when someone says, in this like, oh gosh, in this like confused bewilderment, oh Catherine, I just can't understand why they're not happy for me. Like, really? Not to be patronizing, not to diminish, right, the pain obviously that this kind of situation would cause, but this is not a confusing question. The situation is really mysterious. And I want to be very careful not to defend them, because this is not an excusable emotional state, okay? They're not unhappy for you because of some trivial interpersonal complexity. They are unhappy for you because you are literally the sentient representation, the sentient personification of perceived unfairness. Your existence in that moment functions as evidence, however rational, however irrational, that the distribution of advantage in this world is unjust. The resentment therefore recurses against not the authenticity of the friendship, not against the earnestness of that relationship, but against utilitarian injustice. And when we speak about immaterial human resources, essential human resources, recognition, right, the need to be seen, the need to be valued by virtue of external witnesses, this resource, recognition, it occupies a particularly powerful position within competitive hierarchies. Many will say that they don't want to be famous, and a lot of people, not even just social media, just spaces where your personality is overexposed, like reality TV, all of these things. When you encounter people say things like, oh no, I don't want to be famous, there's a little bit, I think you can like, feel free to disagree with me, but there's a little bit of disingenuousness there, because the objection, the aggressive defense misunderstands the claim. What is at stake here is not superficial celebrity. It is far more fundamental, a psychological necessity. Recognition by an external witness that confers value. Human beings require meaningful recognition, not just superficial recognition, not just not just vapid attention, but meaningful recognition, being truly seen. That stabilizes your sense of self. Developmental psychology, neuroscience, and attachment theory converge all the time on this point. Identity is not constructed in isolation. It is co-regulated through social acknowledgement. The privilege of having meaningful witnesses in your life is therefore, it's not a luxury. It's actually an existential necessity for you to develop your identity. And because I think meaningful recognition is so scarce, it becomes a site of aggressive competition. Once perceived scarcity enters the system, individuals begin extracting more recognition than they reasonably require, because more likely than not, in their immediate lives, in their families, wherever it is that they are, where it is that they are actually stationed, not just online, not just, in their immediate lives, in their immediate circle, they've been starved. And so, like I said, they start to extract, they start to take more recognition, they start to desire more attention than they reasonably require. Not because in all cases they are inherently malicious or inherently narcissistic, but because scarcity psychology produces hoarding behavior. A person who feels under-witnessed begins to pursue excess witnesses. You are low on personal witnesses, on having the blessing of people who look at you, who look into your interior, see who you are and accept you. You are low on that, and so now you require more witnesses than you actually need. You require fame, you require symbolic accumulation, and so now you must actively compete and trade against what people collectively admire. And the more recognition one accumulates, the more the desire curves upon the self. Like capital accumulation in financial markets, the incentive actually becomes self-reinforcing. The more you possess, the more you feel compelled to acquire. And it is important to clarify something. Feeling envy is often passive and voluntary, but creating envy, like intentionally, is strategic. It is profitable, and perhaps most disturbingly of all, it works. It means someone is converting the dissatisfaction of others into proof of their own value, which leads to an uncomfortable question. Most people feel guilty for feeling envious. Most people, experience jealousy, and naturally they don't talk about it because you're going to be shamed for it. But few people feel guilty for cultivating envy within others. Yet, morally speaking, the second may be worse because it involves the intentional manipulation of human insecurity. The modern world has engineered something quite structurally unsettling, but entirely effective. Entire social and economic systems whose profitability depends on the deliberate production of dissatisfaction within its customers, within its consumers. Human beings increasingly construct identities that require witnesses, not merely observers, but people who occupy an inferior evaluative position. The contemporary self, particularly evaluated within these digitally mediated prestige economies, often become psychologically stable only when viewed from below. Admiration must flow upward. Validation must be asymmetrical. The self experiences confirmation not simply by existing, not simply by being who you are, by being yourself, but by being recognized as superior within a hierarchy of comparison. And so this produces a dependency. The self becomes dependent on the continued existence of individuals who experience themselves relative to them as diminished. Envy ceases to just be a moral pathology. It becomes a measurement instrument, because the more envy one provokes, the more successful one appears. Status is therefore not merely indexed to possession, but to the number of observers who cannot possess what one possesses. Value then becomes comparative rather than, intrinsic, because something appears valuable because others want it, others cannot obtain it, others feel effectively reduced in its presence. Yet I have to concede, I have to hold some nuance here, because truly, not all forms of envy in their more primitive or psychological forms are inherently destructive. Many individuals insist that what they experience as quote-unquote jealousy actually manifests as motivation for them to improve themselves. And in many cases, that claim is true. I believe you. Because the critical distinction lies between two different cognitive orientations towards excellence. We're looking at comparative admiration versus imitative admiration. Comparative admiration says, okay, you're irritating me, your excellence actually diminishes me. Imitative admiration is much healthier, much more it is something that we should all honestly endeavor to embody. But yes, imitative admiration says, okay, no, your excellence actually reveals what is possible. Your excellence reveals what I am capable of. The second is what philosophers often call aspirational admiration. It is healthy observation that converts observation into self-development rather than this corrosive resentment, this corrosive envy, this corrosive need to destroy the other person. In the ethical analysis of Aristotle in the Nicomechean Ethics, two closely related Greek terms emerge describing what many seem to think is the same emotional state, but actually it's different. Phonus refers to destructive envy, right? That is the corrosive that is the corrosive bitterness felt at another person's good fortune. Nemesis, by contrast, refers to the severe moral indignation when you perceive this when you perceive this unfair advantage, when you perceive this undeserved advantage. And so even the Greeks made critical distinctions between different states of envy. One is corrosive resentment, the other is ethical intuition about injustice. Similar distinctions also appear in ancient literature. Even without overtly biblical language, divine jealousy is not framed as petty resentment, but actually as a protective response to violated covenantal order. Yet one thing, you guys, when you study this out, when you map this out across all the traditions, across all of the religions, this one thing remains constant. No form of envy, no matter how mild it was in its initial manifestation, retains that state of passive, harmless equilibrium. What I'm essentially saying is that envy does not sit quietly within the human psyche. It seeks movement, it seeks resolution, it seeks comprehension, and if left unattended, it metastasizes. This is the point of the discussion where I think where things do become quite psychologically serious. People often imagine envy as a temporary emotional disturbance that will quietly dissipate over time. If you restrain access to the person who is, who is giving you grief, internally, not because they're doing anything overt, but because their presence just aggravates you for how advantaged they are and how little they deserve everything. No, you distancing yourself from that person will not cure your envy. Anyone who has, I think, critically examined their own psychology will understand that this is rarely how envy truly works. Envy lingers at the psychological perimeter of identity. It sits there and it studies insecurity with this remarkable patience. And in modern society, where we are just oversaturated with comparison signals, it is everywhere. It stands constantly at the psychological door, waiting for moments of vulnerability, waiting for moments when comparison can reasonably, in your frustration, in your disillusionment with the world, could transform your potential admiration into resentment. The mind begins anxiously searching for ways to restore equilibrium. And what a person may eventually do in that psychological state can be profoundly surprising, even to themselves. You see people do insane things, inexcusable things, and it's about literally being driven there. History is full of individuals who, under the influence of prolonged comparative resentment, travel further down the path of hostility than they ever thought imaginable, and they ever thought themselves capable of. If envy indeed can be engineered, right, can be cultivated in the human psyche, is there reason to believe that it can also be cured, that it can also be counteracted? I actually remain hopeful. I think it actually can. The first strategy I personally propose must address the perception of scarcity itself. Modern reward systems define human worth almost exclusively through performance metrics, and we're taught this is shoved down our throats from the moment we enter school. Income, productivity, prestige markers, follower counts, institutional recognition. And so under these conditions, individuals experience their value as perpetually contingent. One must constantly prove themselves as worthy of acknowledgement. But if human worth is understood first, from the beginning, as inherent rather than purely performative, then I think the comparative structure begins to lose its psychological grip. External signals can still reasonably, within rational bounds, be processed as important information, useful data about skill, about your environment, achievement, expertise, but urgently they cease functioning as verdicts about your existential value. And that's the important part. That's what we need to that's really what I think we need to work as a society at dismantling. One does not cease observing hierarchies. That is impossible. We are, like I said, we're not isolated beings. We are constantly going to be exposed and going to necessarily participate in reward systems. One simply ceases interpreting them as definitions of the self. The second strategy involves the deliberate dismantling of manufactured scarcity through generosity. I cannot seriously undersell, you guys, the importance of generosity, because it's not just a moral virtue, it's actually a structural intervention. When individuals share resources, when individuals share knowledge, opportunities, or recognition willfully, not because not because they're being guilted into being good people, no, but yes, when they do this willingly, when they do this because they want to see because they want to see humanity thrive, because they want to contribute to the betterment of society. They quietly undermine the competitive assumptions under which, these envy economies depend. Effectively, they transform hierarchical accumulation into circulatory exchange. And in doing so, they weaken the psychological paradigm that everything of value must be hoarded. Now, there is also a relational solution that pride often resists, and I know that I've definitely been guilty of this, but it's important to mention it because I feel like it can help a lot of people. And I did see this young lady speaking to it in one of the videos I listened to in preparing for this video, but I think she made a really, really good point. Sometimes the person who threatens your status isn't actually present in your life just to aggravate you, just to diminish you. Sometimes this is not your nemesis. Sometimes this person possesses knowledge, experience, or advantage that could be shared. And in such cases, humility becomes a remarkable antidote to envy, because if you would just get over yourself and ask them for help, maybe things would be better. And if they can't help you, that's fine. I mean, that reveals to you useful information about the nature of that relationship, potentially about where they are in life, what they might be going through. Sometimes it's not a personal affront, to you if they can't help you in the way that you expect them to. You're not entitled for people to bend over backwards for your sake. Either way, the posture of learning dissolves the adversarial psychology upon which envy thrives. Ultimately, however, I think a really effective remedy to envy involves understanding something far more fundamental. It requires knowing why you are pursuing what you are doing in the first place. Why you are pursuing a set of actions and behaviors that, yes, may put you at a relational disadvantage within the social hierarchy, but ultimately is absolutely necessary to your purpose. A person who seeks achievement, purely to feel relationally validated, rarely ever feels satisfied, because the metric of success is always external. Someone will always possess more prestige, more recognition, more witnesses.
Trust me, I represent beautiful, rich, famous people, and they're miserable. They're miserable because those are three horrible. Listen, I have a conflicted relationship with my faith, but I have to tell you, those are three gods not worth serving. Celebrity, money, and beauty. Those are three gods not worth pursuing, because I represent three all people who are at the highest level of those things, and they're miserable because there's always someone more famous. There's always someone more rich. And you will never stay as beautiful. There is right now, listen, we're holding together pretty well for three dudes. There is an 18-year-old guy who woke up today looking way better than we could if we tried our hardest.
But when action emerges from a source of internal purpose, when somebody invests in work, in projects, in relationships, in creation, for reasons that transcend comparative status, the gravitational pull of envy weakens. And without that internal reorientation, I think that the search for worth collapses tragically into something analogous to the story of Cain. The problem in that story, and a lot of people have debated, what was going on. I've heard people say, I'm actually on Cain's side. I understand why he was so frustrated, but the problem was not the offering. The problem was that offering for Cain had become a referendum of identity. He had already been comparing himself to Abel, his brother, long before all of this happened. When identity becomes dependent on comparative approval, right, this is horizontal, this is by virtue of how he perceives himself in relation to Abel, versus vertical identity, how God perceives him and appreciates his sacrifice. The psychological consequences, as we see in the story, can become catastrophic, and the consequences extend to us. Now, I've said a lot of things today, and truthfully, there's much more that could be said, but I'm not going to, because, guys, I'm tired. I'm tired of talking, and I'm sure you guys are sick of listening to me as well. But yeah, I think I'm going to conclude by, what I'm not going to do is conclude in some, moral superiority and saying that I've never experienced envy, because that would be dishonest. I feel like I've been able to clock that really quickly. Envy is pervasive because it emerges within structures that are like honestly nearly impossible to avoid. Human beings evolved within comparative social systems. Modern life has simply intensified those systems beyond anything our psychology was initially designed to process. But the fact that envy is common and indeed, statistically normal does not mean that one must just accept its pursuits as, as inevitable. It also does not escape me that within the Christian narrative, envy appears as one of the most central motivations behind the most consequential injustice in religious history. The gospel accounts repeatedly note that religious authorities delivered, Jesus to the Roman executors out of quote unquote envy. What begins as so-called righteous indignation, as, making somebody take accountability for what is honestly really, really stupid, but it's just irritating you. It's just a nag to you, so you're like, oh, you must take accountability. Anyway, that what begins initially as something quite petty, quite mild, can escalate under the right conditions into moral catastrophe. Which is to say, envy is not just a moral weakness. It is a force capable of corrupting entire institutions. And yet there is an even stranger phenomenon that emerges from modern prestige economies, and that's just the, and I know you guys have also seen this, that's just the prevalence of people who enjoy invoking envy, as in they derive satisfaction from provoking envy, from provoking jealousy, not just admiration, but like active jealousy within other people. For them, the presence of envy becomes a sort of validation metric. The more people resent them, the more secure they feel within the relational hierarchy. Their identity stabilizes not through intrinsic purpose, but through the progressive the progressive and active diminishment of others. This psychological posture is very much analogous to what older traditions called as a form of sorcery. Not literal magic, of course, but a deliberate manipulation of human perception in order to confer, in order to engender emotional states that reinforce one's power within the relational hierarchy. A person who learns to engineer envy begins to wield comparative insecurity as their instrument. And that, in my opinion, is a deeply corrosive place, is a deeply it's an awful place for a person to live. For my part, in all of this, I would rather be this is just me, I would rather be disruptive to the entire architecture. Look, you can't stop people from envying you, but you can definitely stop people from you can definitely stop envy from possessing you. If you take a distinctive stance on anything, people will find something, a bone to pick with it. It's not your responsibility to cure or get rid of other people's envy. You are responsible for yours. Seriously, one of the most disruptive ways to interrupt such a system is through the practice of opposite behaviors. Bless people, be generous with your knowledge, with your, if you can stomach it, with your money, with your time, with your energy, with what you can, with your credit, with what you can give. Not in diminishment, right, of your work and what you actually deserve, but guys, don't be stinting. Don't be selfish. Try not to be. When individuals act from a position of abundance, when they get rid of that, some people call it a scarcity complex, but it's become such a TikTok term now that I don't want to use it. But yes, when they operate from a position of security, knowing that they have so much to give, even though I know that I don't have money to give, but when I do, I will give it. I know that in myself, I have a lot of love to give. I have a lot of knowledge to give. So when it comes to being generous with my time, with my energy, with my with my love, with my affection, I'm gonna give it, because I know that I'm not going to run out. I've been blessed with so much. And when people operate from that position, they weaken the comparative logic upon which envy economies depend. Now, none of this, don't hear what I'm not saying. None of this will grant us control over what happens and the way people perceive us. No one, you can't stop somebody from envying you. People will project their insecurities onto your achievements, onto your appearance, onto onto your relationships, onto anything that you have that is objectively good. They will interpret your circumstances through their lens of dissatisfaction. But whilst we cannot prevent envy from appearing around us, we can prevent it from possessing us. We can refuse to internalize the belief that envy that human worth that human worth comes from the relative position we have, compared to others. We can refuse to treat admiration as proof of superiority or resentment as objective proof that you are being exposed to some injustice. It's your prerogative, it's your choice. What's nice about this is you have agency. When you see someone doing well, when you see someone having what you have wanted like your entire life, when someone has the life you wish you had, it reminds, oh my goodness. I used to watch so much Barbie when I was growing up. And there was a song.
I wish I had her life, then I would be so free. I wish I had her life, I'd be another me.
When you see those images, those visuals, those experiences that other people have the privilege of, of experiencing, and they aggravate you, you can choose to be aggravated, or you can choose. What I like to do is I say a prayer, less than even more. Do even more from them. Do even more for them. And if you're not religious, just celebrate in your spirit with them. Celebrate with them in your mind. And initially, of course, it's going to sting. It's not going to feel good. But eventually, the more you do it, it works. It works itself out inside of you, and you become so much more peaceful a person. Life becomes great because everybody's successes make you happy even when you are struggling. It's beautiful. It frees you so much. Yeah, anyways, that is all I have for you guys today. I don't think my perspectives were that crazy, were that, I have worse. Point is, I'm so grateful that you stayed till the end. I will hopefully see you soon. If not, yeah, we'll see what happens. we'll see where the wind blows. But yeah, that's all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for staying this long if you decided to. And yeah, you take care and goodbye.